good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever and whenever you are today. My hair is a little nutty today. Seth Cherupak with the Quiet Authority podcast, where I teach you how to attract more high status clients by simply having better messaging. And I did a live earlier this week that if you missed it, you need to go check that out, especially if you're stuck within your warm network and you are an expert who has really high ticket products or services that you sell. And you keep attracting these people who are comparing you to competitors, saying, I can get the same thing from other person when you know that you have something that's superior or unique in your category. Or you get people who are price shoppers, who are ghosting, who seem really interested at the beginning of the call and then are saying, let me think about it. Those types of buyers are probably coming to you because of your messaging. And Monday, I showed, that was yesterday, wasn't it? Monday of this week, I broke down some specific scientific language patterns that you're probably not even thinking about. They're probably all over your copy that are quietly signaling to the wrong people and repelling the right people. And this is something that is backed by a lot of science. I covered it in that live. So make sure that if you missed that, you go to my YouTube channel to check that out. Today, I want to talk about something a little bit different, and that's fear of failure. Now, if you're here for my marketing content, I'll go ahead and send a link to my YouTube channel so that you can find the one that I just mentioned, which I talked about earlier this week, the top 3 reasons why sales funnels fail as soon as you start to scale your spend. I talked about those little subtle language patterns in your messaging and how they can actually attract those price sensitive clients and what you can do to change that. And what's astonishing about this is you can market to the exact same channels and the exact same pool of people that you are right now and make these subtle changes in your language and in your messaging and feel like you've literally been like teleported to an alternative universe where all of a sudden all these price shopping people, you still get a couple of them, but you get a lot less of them and you get a lot more of these high quality people who are fast decision makers who pay more money. And let's face it, when people pay more money, it's usually because they have more money. They have more money because they have a different way of thinking, and that different way of thinking causes them to be much more cooperative when they're hiring an expert. They don't create a lot of drama. They're more likely to bring you referrals. They are much less price sensitive. They pay their invoices on time. And if you want to attract more of those types of people and you are just wondering where are they all, it's not about where they are. It's about the bait, the messaging that you're using, that you're putting out there is quietly signaling to those lower altitude clients. And once you change these patterns, and I created a whole book about this, and you can use my book and AI by putting the book in there, having it read and study the subject, because AI can't do this, by the way. It's not familiar with this. It hasn't been doing what I've been doing for the past 20 years. You can put the book in there. You can put your messaging from your website, your webinar, whatever it is, your sales calls, and it'll instantly tell you, here are the language patterns that are secretly signaling to the wrong types of clients. And when you change that in your messaging, you will be astonished at the results. So make sure that you go to my YouTube channel to check that out. That was earlier this week. Today, I'm going to talk about fear of failure. Now, fear of failure wears a lot of faces. Fear of failure wears the face of being afraid of asking for the money, or being afraid of being assertive about asking for a contract or asking for the next action. Fear of failure can also paralyze you in this trap that a lot of entrepreneurs and people get stuck in, where they have a lot of different projects that are unfinished and they never really get to launch on any of them. And they may not even think it's fear of failure. They may call it something like procrastination or shiny object syndrome, but it's all rooted in the fear that something's going to go wrong and you're going to pay a high price when it goes wrong, either in shame, either in loss of money, whatever it is. The fear of failure is paralyzing, and it paralyzes you in a lot of different ways. In fact, what will happen is sometimes the fear of failure causes a person to be very busy with things that aren't really adding a lot of value to their life, like a business owner who spends like 20 or 30 hours a week doing things that aren't bringing a lot of revenue into his business. And meanwhile, he's neglecting the things that could very quickly bring a lot of new referral partners, more clients, whatever it is, or even like some big partnership opportunity, maybe where someone buys out his company or invests in his company, whatever it is. But they're not doing those types of things because they're busy with other things, and they may be thinking, well, I just don't have enough hours in a day, I never get around to it. But there is a subconscious program running that causes you to put a lot of busyness on your calendar in order to avoid the things you're afraid of doing, and more importantly, to avoid the potential outcome. And that's what we want to talk about today. If fear of failure, whatever face it wears, procrastination, fear of rejection, I don't care what label you put on it. If it is paralyzing you right now, or distracting you, or causing you to go in a lot of different directions, or causing you to maybe not be as bold as you could when asking for the money, when talking about money, when asking for the sale, this is going to be one of the most important things that you have ever heard about overcoming this invisible self sabotager. And I say that because I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, thousands of them, for more than 20 years on one and group calls. And I've helped a lot of people overcome the fear of failure. And there's almost nothing that can change your life as dramatically and as quickly as getting rid of this, because it changes everything in your life. It changes your attitude about things, it changes your follow through, it changes your focus when you really dissolve what we call fear of failure. Now, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, okay, what's this guy going to tell me to do? Is he going to give me some sort of a magic pill or magic button or just something? No, not magic pill. I'm not going to insult you like that. You're not looking for shortcuts if you're my audience, but you're thinking, is there something that can finally help me to get a handle on this? And usually when people talk about fear of failure and overcoming those things and overcoming procrastination, they give you these superficial things like making to-do lists and all these other things that are external. But then there's another group of people out there who teach you, we're going to help you overcome fear, master fear. And I have read a lot of these books. I've been in the self help industry for decades now. I've actually ghost written a lot of books, including New York Times bestsellers, on these types of topics. And I'm going to show you today how I would say more than 90% of the self help stuff out there, online, in books, even at expensive seminars, the things that they're telling you about fear of failure and how to overcome them are actually making the problem worse, more persistent, and harder to solve. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, because you're probably thinking, well, I don't know if I want to hear that, right? That the advice out there isn't working. But here's what is liberating about that. Think about all the time, the effort, the energy, the reading, the study, the diligence that you've put into overcoming the fears that are holding you back. Just think about that for a second. And maybe you don't feel like you've made the progress. You feel like you're still kind of stuck and you're like, what is finally going to work? Doesn't somebody out there have the answer to this? Imagine this. Imagine if that same diligence, that same time, that same energy, that same commitment that you've been putting into doing things the wrong way, the ineffective way, actually is invested into something that is going to work so fast, you'll be shocked. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. I had somebody who I worked with just last year, 10 years of hard addiction. And we're not talking about like, you know, addiction that started when he was in his 30s or 40s. I mean, this sadly started when he was a kid and he was prescribed certain medications that actually got him hooked. 10 years of it. Went to therapists, went to counselors, went to did all kinds of things. And in 1 week, this person came down and visited me in South Florida, stayed with me for a week. And I don't do that with everybody. And we had one session. It took a little while to kind of unpack what was really going on, but we had one 90-minute session and he was a different person after that. And I'm still in contact with this gentleman several months later, and his life has changed dramatically. Right? In other words, he's unstuck. You know how sometimes you go to a seminar, or you go to maybe do a meditation, a breathwork session, or something like that, and you feel great afterwards, and you feel like I finally got it. And maybe the person working with you, the coach, the counselor, whatever it is, took you back to a point in your life on the timeline where they said, well, we're going to treat the root cause of fear of failure. And they found it. And you felt really good after talking about it. And you felt really good after whatever kind of magic they did, whether it was hypnosis, whether it was positive affirmation, prayer. But a couple weeks later, that feeling of elation and courage wore off. And before you know it, you've made a little bit of a progress, but you're still stuck. These same patterns are coming back, and you're thinking, well, why didn't that work? Do I need to do more of it? And then we become a tourist, where we go out and we start looking for all these experiences that are going to erase fear of failure, including things like psychedelics, weekend retreats, those smoke things that you go in where I don't care what it is. If you are not addressing the true root cause of fear of failure, it will keep coming back. Now you can change your association in your nervous system. You can make yourself feel better. You can get rid of fear doing things like meditation, breath work, all those things I talked about. But that's regulating your nervous system. The fear of failure is actually attached to a programming that's in your nervous system, your thinking, your beliefs. And even if you, quote, heal a recent wound or a recent trauma that you suffered because of a big failure in your life or a big rejection, if those internal things, which we're going to talk about today, if they don't change, your nervous system may feel better after you've done the meditation session or the coaching session or the 8-week coaching program. But if the program that's running those things, that's causing you to inflict those wounds, don't change, you're going to end up probably in a high pressure situation, or when you're faced with a big opportunity and before you know it, the program's going to start running again, and it's going to put your body back into that anxious state or that fearful state or whatever it is. And so what happens is people go back for more meditation, more weekend seminars, and they become addicted to this regulation of their nervous system. But it's the programming. It's the programming that's really causing it. Now, you've probably heard that term before, programming. He's talking about mindset. He's going to talk about positive affirmations. What I'm going to tell you today is probably something you have never heard before. And that's actually going to be a good thing. It's going to make you feel a little uncomfortable. But the second you realize what's really behind fear of failure, even after understanding the root, it is slowly going to lose, well, not slowly, it's actually very fast, lose its grip on you, just as I did with this young man in this 90-minute session. Okay. And this has nothing to do with hypnosis. It has nothing to do with probably any of the stuff that you've tried, maybe even psychedelics, right? Positive affirmations, nothing to do with that. That is a chemical change in your nervous system. But the deeper change is something completely different. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, first of all, let's talk about fear. Okay, so fear typically shows up as fear of failure, fear of success, which those are really the same thing, because the fear of, like, let's say that you're hitting an income level you've never hit before, like $300,000 a year. Maybe that's like you've never made more than that. What happens is you get stuck at that income level by things that seem to be out of your control, but you can't seem to get past it. And you know, there's a lot of people in your industry that are making a lot more than that. So you know it's possible to do it, but you can't seem to get past that income level. Well, the fear of failure obviously is afraid of failing, but the fear of success is even sneakier, because the fear of success is basically like in your programming is saying, what if we do get to $500,000 a year, $1 million a year? What's that like? I've never done that before. I've never experienced that before. I don't. It's a completely foreign. It's like a foreign planet that you're being parachuted onto, like an alien planet where you don't speak the language. It's a completely new experience. And so your mind's thinking, well, what if I get all the way up there and I fail? The failure is going to be bigger. It's going to be more embarrassing. It's going to be more costly. And that fear of failure creates fear of success, because you don't want to succeed to the point where the failure might be really painful, right? So fear of failure and fear of success are really, they're pretty much the same thing. They have the same root. Same thing with fear of rejection, and same thing of things like fear of asking for money. All of them are just different branches of one tree, right? It all comes down, people are always talking about it: overcome fear, conquer fear, fear of public speaking, whatever it is. Here is a life-changing revelation today, and we're going to unpack this one level at a time. When you hear this is going to make so much sense to you. You're going to think, why aren't more people talking about that? I'm surprised I'd never heard of it. And your own intuition and your common sense is going to hear this, and you're going to go, that actually makes sense. So, first of all, there's going to be a couple layers to this that we're going to peel back. First one is that all the fears we talked about are actually not about fear, right? Fear is not really the thing holding you back. What's happening is there's another emotion, right? There's four other emotions, actually. We'll talk about those in a second, that cause fear to show up when fear is irrational or unnecessary. Now think about that for a second. Let's say that you have, like, you're in like a school, right? And there's a kid there and he just keeps pulling the fire alarm when there's no fire. There's nothing wrong with a fire alarm system or warning people when a fire is coming. The problem is he's causing the alarm to go off when the alarm, which is necessary, is not necessary in that situation. In other words, we become fearful of things that we don't really need to be afraid of. You think about, well, why am I afraid of that? It's completely irrational. Fear is showing up because some other emotion, which we'll talk about in a second, is summoning fear. Now you're probably thinking, well, this just sounds like some clever philosophy you're saying. It's not. This is completely practical. And here's why. Think about all the effort that you've put into overcoming fear. If fear is not the real problem, which it's not, is it any surprise that all the things you've tried haven't worked so far? It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that you're trying to solve the wrong problem, and a problem that's actually not solvable. I'll talk about that in a second. But imagine this, you go out, your car's not working, right? You get into your car, you try to start it, it doesn't go. Now, a car is complicated, but it's got the engine, the transmission, it's got the electrical system. And let's say you take it to a mechanic and they go, well, there's something wrong with the engine. And they go through there and they try to fix the engine, they replace parts, and then you take your car out again and it's still not working. 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 There's nothing wrong with the car. The problem is the person you're taking it to is trying to fix a problem that is not the problem. Let's say the problem is really in the electrical system, but they keep trying to fix the engine. Now let's map that to fear. If fear is not the real problem, and you keep trying to overcome fear, and you're looking for things about how to wipe out fear, dissolve fear, overcome fear, is it any surprise that if you're trying to solve the wrong problem, no matter how much effort you put into it, no matter how smart you are, how diligent you are, no matter how much sense the thing that you're doing to overcome fear makes, it doesn't matter because fear is not really the problem. There's another emotion which is ringing the fire alarm and is causing fear to show up as the guardian when fear is not necessary, right? It's kind of like, let's say that I'm at my front door, right? I open the door, somebody comes in and they're just a regular guest. They're not harmful or anything like that. But there's somebody in my house who pulls a gun on them. Why? Because they see that person as a threat when they're not really a threat. Now, that person who pulls the gun could also use that gun to protect our home, right? This is a controversial topic, I know, but it's not the problem of like protecting the home. Fear is supposed to protect you, right? That's what it's designed to do. So you're never going to overcome it because it's wired into your nervous system. It's supposed to be there. And the more that you fight it, the more your body's going to fight back because fear is necessary. The problem is you can pull the gun on the person when the person isn't a threat. And that's what fear is doing right now. Fear is showing up. Fear is doing its job. There's nothing wrong with the fear. It doesn't need to be overcome or wiped out. It's showing up when it's not necessary. And what I found when I work with people who are trying to overcome fear, I found that there are either one of four emotions that are actually summoning fear when fear is not necessary. So you can try to get rid of the fear all you want. That's not the problem. You're always going to feel fear. I mean, you can't get rid of fear because you'd have to literally tear out your entire nervous system and replace it with a new one. Like you'd have to become a robot. Like it's like saying, well, I'm going to get rid of athlete's foot by cutting my foot off. Well, you can't get athlete's foot anymore, but you no longer got a foot. It's even more impossible and more irrational to try to get rid of fear because fear is necessary. It's natural. These other emotions cause you to summon fear as a guardian when fear is not needed. And all of a sudden, fear says, stop, don't do this. If you do this, such and such is going to happen. Fear does the job it's supposed to do. So you don't ask for the money because you're, quote, afraid, but you're not really afraid. Something else is summoning fear. When you go out on stage, you don't perform as well as you could because what? Because fear is showing up? Well, yeah, but the reason fear is showing up is because there's something else that's saying, hey, fear, we need you right now. There's a threat. Okay, so that's the first thing. That ought to be a big relief for everybody listening to this because all the effort you've put in to try to overcome fear of failure, once you identify the emotion that's really driving it, then you can target that emotion and say, okay, now this is the real problem. This is how I'm going to solve it. And when you do that, when you realize what it is, which is normally what I do on a coaching call, takes me usually about 90 minutes to really peel back what's really behind, what's really causing them to summon fear. Once we identify what that thing is, I have things that I can do to help a person to get rid of one of those other four emotions, which I'll talk about in a second. But now you're probably thinking, well, why would you want to get those other emotions? If you can't get rid of fear, can you get rid of these others? There is actually a very surprising reason why the self-sabotaging emotions, the real ones, are very not easy, but you can get rid of them. It's totally practical and there are ways to do it. And here's why. The real self sabotaging emotions are what scientists call artificial emotions. They're constructed emotions. They're not real. In other words, you're not born with them. You're born with fear. You're supposed to have fear. That's why you can't get rid of it, right? These other four are actually not even real emotions. I'll tell you how I know that, and I'll tell you the science behind it in just a second. But let's go ahead and lay them out. First one is guilt. Now, if you feel guilty about asking someone for money because you're afraid that they're not going to pay their mortgage the next day, even though you're selling them something that's really going to benefit them, if you feel guilty about that, you're not going to do it. You're going to shrink back. You're going to pull back. And what most people do is go, well, fear of asking for money. How do I overcome fear of asking for money? And all of a sudden they're doing hypnosis and positive affirmation and all these other things. And guilt's getting away guilt free over here. Nothing's happening to it. So it keeps showing up. That's what's really happening is guilt. There's a lot of different faces this can wear, but maybe you feel guilty about the fact that like you messed up a relationship in the past and you have an opportunity to have a really good one in front of you, but you still feel guilty about the past relationship you messed up. You're going to hold back in the new one. You've probably seen people do this, right? And this shows up in all kinds of ways. Guilt is the first artificial emotion. I'll talk about what I mean that in a second, that causes fear to show up when fear is unnecessary. You can try to get rid of fear, or you can really zero in on not only what's causing the guilt, but the cause of guilt to be manufactured inside our nervous system in the first place. That's the first emotion. Now, as I reveal this second emotion, I'm going to tell you something that is truly astonishing about the first two emotions. Okay, and once you see what I'm about to reveal to you, you're gonna notice it everywhere. It's gonna literally give you like a pair of X-ray glasses into human behavior. So the second emotion is shame. Shame, again, causes people to shrink back. Like maybe you're ashamed about something in your life, or you're ashamed about something that you are not very knowledgeable about. So when you're on stage, you don't really come out with all the confidence that you need to because you're afraid someone's going to find out that maybe you stutter, or maybe you don't want to share your story, your transformational story that you normally do from stage because you're ashamed of something in it. Or maybe you're ashamed that somebody is going to search you online and find out something about you. There's all kinds of reasons that a person can feel shame, but guilt and shame are the first two emotions. Now, here's what happens a lot of the time. And I run into this resistance a lot when people come to me and they say, I got fear of failure. I got fear of success. I got to overcome it. And we start talking about guilt or shame. And they're like, oh, no, 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 no. And shame causes them to not accept that they're in shame. Shame is very tricky like that. We don't like to admit we're ashamed of things. And that actually is the first clue. We don't like to admit we're guilty about things, right? That's hard for us. This is why we put labels like fear on it. It's easier to tell them, well, I'm afraid of this than to say, oh, I feel guilty about it. I mean, think about that. That's why would you even admit that? And so what happens is we're more comfortable calling something fear, because once we call it guilt, then the next question becomes, what are we guilty about? Then we got to feel guilty about it. And we don't want to face that. Same thing with shame. So that's what causes us to put these masks on guilt and shame that we call fear. And next thing you know, we're busy trying to overcome fear, and guilt and shame are getting off scot free over here. They're just continuing to run your life because you're not doing anything about them. So those are the first two. Now, guilt and shame are so incredibly powerful that entire civilizations can be created to where the people fear the government, or comply with the government, or comply with the emperor, or whoever it is who's in charge. And anthropologists call this guilt and shame cultures. Now, in the West, we're a very guilt driven culture, right? It's all about you guilty or innocent, and guilt a lot of time drives people to overwork because they feel like they got to make up for something. So, the way that, and I don't have time to get too much into this, but once you start looking into this, if you're like really want to dive deep and look at guilt and shame cultures in anthropology and start studying it, the emotions of guilt and shame are so powerful in being able to control and manage people's behavior that they can create entire like legal systems and cultural structures that cause people to comply with a set of rules and think that it's completely normal. In the East, it's usually shame, right? There's shame versus honor. Those are the polar twins. You feel a little bit shameful about something, or if you're honorable. And you want to move towards honor and away from shame. And so, of course, that's how, the government, whoever it is, can compel people to do things in that culture. Now, in the Western culture, we're very guilt driven. So it's guilt versus innocence. And the tug of war between those two emotions If it's going on inside of you, it's very easy for other people to manipulate you. You ever heard of the guilt trip? Like, you don't want to do something and then you say you don't want to do it and someone starts making you feel guilty about it. Next thing you know, you want to do it because guilt's driving you. Right? Imagine that on a large cultural scale. That's actually how a lot of these civilizations are built. And anthropologists have done a lot of research in this: guilt cultures versus shame cultures. So that is how powerful and crippling these two emotions are. And here's what's interesting: a lot of the time, even people who are really ambitious and successful are still driven by guilt or shame. It's like they're moving away from guilt, trying to make themselves feel innocent, and they're still being driven by artificial emotions. So things like burnout, overworking, being a workaholic, all those things are rooted in one of these two emotions. Now, I'm going to tell you something really surprising about these emotions and the other two in a second. And this is going to be the secret to getting rid of what's called fear of whatever really quickly. But those are the first two emotions: guilt, shame. Third one is resentment. Now, this sounds a little tricky, but here's what I've noticed in my coaching work is that I have worked with a lot of salespeople and entrepreneurs and people whose job is to promote themselves in such a way to where they're making more money. They elevate their social status. One of the most common reasons a lot of them reach a block in their income or just can't seem to get to the level they want to is because they secretly resent the people that are already in that category, that are already making that income level, that are already that successful. And it usually shows up as like envy. Like, if you're watching this and you have some boiling envy over the people who have succeeded at something that you haven't yet, that envy is holding you back. That resentment is. And here's why: you cannot become something that you resent. Your identity will not allow it. It will not allow you to become something if you secretly resent the thing you're trying to become. Maybe you can kind of muscle your way towards it, but there's all these subconscious programs that run and say, I don't want to be seen as that type of person. I've always seen this type rich people as really like they kind of took shortcuts to get where they are. Like they think they're better than everybody else. There's a resentment in you, and your subconscious mind, your identity doesn't want to become that person. Now you might be thinking, no, it's not true, Seth. I really want to become rich. I know what you're saying, like on a conscious level, but you have to understand, like, your conscious mind is only able to like handle a little bit of information, right? That's why phone numbers are only, I think they're what, 9 digits long. That's why phone numbers are as long as they are, is because when people had to memorize phone numbers, they knew that the conscious mind could only handle a certain amount of information. And so they limited it to that amount of information. We can only think about so much at once, but we're processing information all the time. Information is coming in to us all the time. And guess what's really processing it? It's not your conscious mind. It's what we call your subconscious mind. And it can compute like billions and billions of bits of information per second. And we don't even know it. So it's like there's these instructions being handed off to this factory of workers in your body that are setting up this vibration in your nervous system that's causing you to feel like, I got to shrink back. I don't want to become this person. And you may not be consciously aware that this is happening, but of course you're not. I mean, think about what I just said. Conscious Your conscious mind, your jabbering monkey mind, the mind that actually plans and strategizes, the mind that's planning to achieve the thing you want to achieve, but subconsciously all these things are working, like fear, like, sorry, shame, guilt, and resentment. And your subconscious mind will not allow you to become a person who you resent. So that's why a lot of people, like, they secretly resent or are envious of a person who's achieved a certain level of success, and they think, well, I want to get there. I want to get there. But this mind is saying, I want to get there. And this one down here is saying, I will never become that type of person. Okay. So resentment's the third one. There's a lot of other faces resentment wears, but we'll just stop it there because I think you probably understand the concept. So the fourth emotion, and this one is going to sound really weird to y'all, but there's guilt, shame, resentment that show up as fear, all three of those. The fourth one is grief. Now, you're probably thinking, well, grief is like only if you lost somebody and they died. That's not true. Grief is also can be the grieving over the death of an identity, the death of an identity. And if you've identified yourself as a hardworking person who is, really, like, you've pride yourself on your ability to make the rent every month, to solve financial problems, to get out of financial crisis, that's kind of been your thing. Like, you grew up with a lot of struggle and a lot of fighting, and your identity is tied into like being this person who is capable of like surviving poverty or whatever it is, or surviving whatever it is you survived. And your identity is so tied up in that that if you try to become someone who actually has a lot of money and no longer has the problems that you had to solve, that identity doesn't want to die. That identity that is so wrapped up in like your ability to like recover after a big heartache or breakup, it's afraid of what's going to happen to it if we suddenly are in a relationship where that's not going to happen. If we're suddenly in a financial situation where that's no longer going to happen, that part of you is going to die. It's going to have to, it's not going to be necessary anymore. And so, grief, the grieving of the loss of an identity, that pain, to avoid that pain, subconsciously to avoid it, it will cause you to shrink back. And then you'll call it fear of rejection. You'll call it fear of failure, call it whatever it is. But the truth is that it's one of these four emotions that's really at work. It's either guilt, shame, resentment, or grief. Those four. Okay, I'll tell you one quick story about grief just to make sure people understand this. One of my first coaching clients back when I first started, this is more than 20 years ago, was really stuck in his life, had been stuck for about 10 years. He had been a professional soccer player. He was really good and he was really well known as like the go-to guy for that. I mean, he was like a hometown hero type who had gone on to play in professional sports. All of a sudden, one day he's in a game and he shatters his knee and it's hurt so bad he can't play again. 10 years later, the guy is still stuck, doesn't know why he's stuck. It took me about 30 minutes on a phone call to really get down to the nub of it and to realize that he was still holding grief for that identity that he couldn't let go of. He still saw himself as that person, and the grief would not allow him to move forward. Now, when he came to me, he was talking about fear, right? Well, I'm just afraid of failure. I think he was talking about fear of failure and procrastination or something like that. Fear of intimacy was another one. But it's all rooted back to like it was this identity that had he couldn't let it die. He couldn't just accept it and let it go away. In fact, a lot of people who I've talked to are on their second business, right? They're starting a second business. Maybe they started the first one and they're trying to succeed in their second business and they just can't seem to get there. They seem stuck. And I've actually had them have a funeral for their old business so that they could let go of it because the grief and the pain of that business being dead causes you to go, I don't want to succeed with this one again because it could happen like it happened the last time. It's not fear. We call it fear, but it's really grief. Now, here's the good news about these four emotions. And this is where I'm going to give you access to a book that I am writing about this that I just wrote called Finding Your Power Identity, which talks about how fear is not really a real issue. That's why people can't overcome fear of success, fear of failure, fear of all those other fears is because they're trying to fight fear. Fear is not the real problem. The problem is either guilt, shame, grief, or resentment is causing fear to show up when fear is unnecessary. Just like the guy who shows up at the front door that I talked about earlier with a gun, pointing it at someone who's completely innocent and not a threat. It's not that the person trying to defend their home is a bad thing. They're supposed to do that. They're showing up when it's not necessary, when there's no threat. Shame, guilt, grief, resentment, they summon fear. They get on the cell phone and they call fear, right? They ring the fire alarm and like saying, there's a fire, there's a fire. Fear shows up to do what it's supposed to do. And all of a sudden you're shrinking back from the thing that you know you need to be doing. And you're thinking, well, it's fear. Fear is not the problem. These four emotions are causing fear to show up when fear is unnecessary. Now, why is it that people call these things fear? Again, it goes back to that weirdness, that social awkwardness of saying, I'm ashamed of this, I'm guilty about it. We don't want to talk about that. People don't talk about those things in public. Grief is a little bit more acceptable to talk about, but not grief of an identity. Most people don't even realize that's happening. So, of course, that lack of self-awareness causes you to call the thing fear or depression or whatever it is, or anger or resentment or even trauma, right? But the truth is, it's one of these four emotions that's holding you back. Now, the good news is now that you know this, it's okay. Fear is no longer the problem. I'll leave fear alone. I'll quit trying to dominate and master and wipe out fear. Let me ask myself, really, which of these four things is it? Now, this is something I do on coaching calls. And so I can't give you the formula for figuring this out. That's why I do it one-on-one. But once we unpack, once we figure out what's really going on, what the real emotion is, then the reason you can get rid of these emotions is because they are artificial emotions. In other words, they're not things that we are born with. They're not wired into our nervous system, right? They're not things that can be measured by fear. And they like measured the way fear is. And that's how scientists actually discovered that these four emotions, they're not real emotions. They always have to have, listen very carefully, this is the big secret right here. They always have to have a story attached to them. And the story may not even be something you're consciously aware of, that causes you to feel this thing that we call fear, that we call shame, that we call guilt, that we call resentment, that we call grief. Without those stories, these emotions don't really exist, right? They're not like a wiring in our nervous system. It's fear, that's one of them. Fear is real. These other four are only there because there are stories that summon them. There are stories that like actually create shame, that create guilt, that create resentment, that create grief. The thing we're really feeling is not the problem. There's this story that's causing this thing to be summoned when it's unnecessary. They're artificial emotions. Now let's go one level deeper because you're probably thinking, okay, this all makes a lot of sense. Now I can understand not only why fear has been so hard to overcome, but how these real problems, they could be very easy, not easy, but I could reasonably get rid of these things because now I'm not trying to amputate a part of my nervous system. I'm not trying to get rid of something I was born with. I'm not trying to like act against biology. All I'm trying to do is like you remove an artificial implant or something like, or some foreign object that got stuck in your arm. You pull it out, you're fine, right? Even if it was hurting you before, it doesn't belong there. These four emotions are like that. That's why we call them. That's why they're called artificial emotions. Okay, now question is number one, which one of these is really holding you back? It may be more than one, but the first thing you want to do is stop blaming fear for what fear is not causing. The reason fear of rejection is still holding you back is because you've been telling yourself it's fear. The reason fear of failure, fear of success, whatever it is, keeps showing up and you can't seem to get rid of it is because the thing that's really summoning it is getting off scot free. You're not even labeling it. You're not even like recognizing what it is. Once you recognize, okay, it's really shame that's holding me back. Now, what is the internal story? What is the program? What is the belief that's actually causing me to feel that artificial emotion? And if you can reframe that, if you can change that, which you can do, all of a sudden fear never shows up. Fear stops showing up when fear is unnecessary, and your life changes just like that. Now, before we talk about how this is done, let's talk about a very, very common problem in the self help world. Typically, when people talk about how, and you've probably seen this in coaching programs where they say, we're going to get to the real root of your fear. We're going to get to the real root of your trauma, the real root of whatever it is. But here's what they do a lot of the time. When they say the real root, the only thing they do is take you back to an experience in your past, usually in your childhood, and they say, okay, this is the first time you felt shameful about this thing here, and so we're going to revisit that point in your past. We're going to do whatever Reiki, magic, affirmation, hypnosis, whatever it is. We're going to heal that point in your past, and then all of a sudden, fear is supposed to disappear. That feels really good for like a couple days after you've done whatever the thing is. It always feels good to like release something from your past, right? But that's not the cause. The fact that you can find this event on the time and think about logically, like what does this have to do with anything? Something in a timeline in the past is somehow causing something in the, well, some people might say, well, the body keeps the score, right? The body does keep the score, but the score keeping is the story I'm talking about, right? That story didn't start with that event. Sometimes the event just exasperated it or caused it to feel more painful, but the story actually came long, long before that event where maybe like your dad walked out on you or your mother hit you for the first time or like somebody betrayed you. If you think the event on the timeline is the root cause and you address that event, you haven't really solved the root cause. So is it any surprise that the thing is showing up again? And this is such a common mistake. People say, well, we're going to get to the real root cause. And they go to this event on the timeline, and it's just another manifestation of this deeper story that was there long before it. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, when did this story or this thing you're talking about actually get installed, plugged into our system, plugged into like our nervous system? It actually happened when you started learning language. Now, at the final level, when learning language, you see, language is what actually causes you to construct belief systems, like to construct stories. It's language. And so typically what people say, well, is you got to be more positive. You got to say positive affirmations. You got to say, I am rich and successful and so happy and grateful. And that doesn't work either. And I'll tell you why. If you don't get rid of the story that's causing the fear or the shame or the guilt or the resentment or the grief, if you don't get rid of that, your nervous system will fight that positive affirmation. It'll feel good at first, right? It'll feel really good to think positively, and you'll say it every day, and you'll start to notice a change. But then all of a sudden, one day you'll stop doing it, or it'll stop working, and it feels really good for like those first few 6 weeks. You're like, well, I just need another positive affirmation. I got to go to another seminar. I got to. But the problem is, like, you're painting over rotten wood by changing your language. Now you're probably thinking, well, Seth, didn't you just say it started with your language? Yeah, but there's actually something deeper that gets installed with us once we start learning language that's one level deeper than the words that we speak. The words we speak, the words that we speak in our head, that we speak consciously to people, they are actually not, the words aren't causing it. There's something deeper behind the words. Now, think about it this way. I'll give you a metaphor before I give you the science, because this will make a lot more sense. Imagine that you are drinking out of a poisoned river and it's making you really sick and making like you're like in a Walking Dead world where you're like post-apocalyptic, where you're having to like drink out of the rivers, and one river is poisonous and your water supply is poisoned, and you're thinking, well, I'll just go take a bucket, start taking the poison water out, right? And I'll start putting non-poison water in. The problem is that the poison is probably getting into the river upstream somewhere, and you got to go find where that thing is that's poisoning the water. And if you fix that, the poison will start flowing downstream. Eventually, it'll be gone. It'll be clean water. It's the same thing with language. The words you're speaking, whether they're negative or positive affirmations, self-talk, whatever it is, they're like the water in the river, right? They are they're like the branches of a deeper tree that actually is deeper than language, something we start internalizing once we start learning language. Now, think about this for a second. If you've been trying to use positive affirmations and journaling and all these other things, or maybe creating these identity scripts where you're reading like, I such and such am, and you read all the stuff that you want to be, that's language, right? But the language is actually coming out from something else. So whatever belief you have about money, we'll call it a belief for now. Whatever belief you have about getting rich, whatever belief you have about being happy, that deeper program down here, it has its own language patterns that come out as a result of it. And so what you're doing is you have something down here that's saying, don't make this much money. Don't approach this person. Don't be yourself confidently on stage. Don't put the videos out online. It's saying this. And meanwhile, you've got this language, these positive affirmations you're constantly feeding yourself. And it was really the idea that this is eventually going to change this? It's not, right? For the same reason that you can't take the poison out of the river by just barreling it out. You got to go upstream. Well, what's happening is our language comes out as the result of deeper things called cognitive metaphors. Now, you probably think, what the hell is a cognitive metaphor? A cognitive metaphor is a larger, broader concept that actually determines the language you use to describe something. These are so deeply embedded that you don't even know it. There's a couple of them you probably got embedded right now. You got probably some cognitive metaphors about money, relationships that are actually causing all that negative self-talk, all those self-doubting things to kind of like branch out from it. And you can try to clip the branches and change the branches, but the thing at the root, the deeper thing, the cognitive metaphor, is actually the thing that's going to cause the weeds to keep growing back out again, right? And you hear this metaphor a lot of the time in the self-help world, like, well, we got to pull the weeds out. And then we got to then they're talk about, we got to get rid of the trauma. We got to get rid of like the whatever negative programming it is. And they're pulling the weeds, but there's something deeper below the ground that's causing those weeds to grow. So you pull them out, you put good plants in, the weeds start growing up again. And this experience, you feel this in your nervous system as something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you have a clash between two beliefs or two feelings or a deeper cognitive metaphor and the language you're using. So what you're actually doing when you're just dumping positive affirmations in is you're literally creating a war and a conflict in yourself, and you can win it by sheer willpower for a while. You can keep saying the affirmations, you can keep pushing yourself, but willpower is like holding your breath underwater. You can do it for a while, but once you run out of willpower, you're going to backslide right where you were before, because willpower is not designed to make transformation, right? The deeper thing, the cognitive metaphor, is actually the thing which is going to fight those positive affirmations, because there's this clash between these two things. So what the heck is a cognitive metaphor? Think about the term time is money. Time is money. Time is actually not money. Why do we say time is money? Because we are thinking about one thing in terms of another, right? You can say Relationships are wars. Love is a game. Um, a relationship, maybe if you're really negative, a relationship is a battle for control. Now, consciously speaking, we can say, well, a relationship is a battle for control is a really negative thought, a negative thing to say. But the problem is, what is actually rooted in that? What is the deeper meaning that's causing me to use the language to describe relationships? And here's what you can do. You can look at the way you talk about money. You can look at the way that you talk about your relationships, and don't try to change it. Don't say, oh, I shouldn't talk that way. That's negative self talk, and try to replace it with positive, because you're literally cutting off the self awareness that you need to figure out what the deeper thing is. Let's take money, for example. How do we typically think about money and talk about money? The metaphor that we use for money is kind of like the water in this bottle, right? It's this finite thing that fits into a container, and we either have more or less of it. And if we want to have more of it, we dump some in. If some leaks out, we're losing it, right? It's a metaphor. It's us understanding money spatially as a spatial metaphor, as something that fits inside a container. Now that makes sense, because typically, what do we put our money into? A bank account, right? Or a piggy bank. We think, well, that's, of course, that's what money is. Actually, no, it's not. And if you change your cognitive metaphor about money, it will change all, eventually, will change all your self talk about money, all your behaviors. It'll lower this resistance because you understand it at a deeper level. In other words, on your really like heart gut level, if your general concept about money is that it's like this, there's either more or less of it. How do you think you're going to feel when you have somebody over here who you think they got a bucket full of money, you got a bucket full of money, and if you ask them for money, their bucket's going down, and you're thinking, oh my God, they're not going to be able to like pay for their kids' school clothes. There's this guilt that comes in. You see, this model of money, this way of thinking about money as this thing that kind of fits into this container, is actually causing things like guilt, because, well, if I have more of it, somebody else is going to have less of it. Or maybe it's shame. I don't deserve to have this much money, right? You can go through all of them. I'm not going to go through all of them because it's too broad, but that idea of money as a thing that fits into a container, that's a metaphor. That's a deeper concept. And everything you say, I've got more in my bank account. I'm running out of money. I don't have enough money. I need to increase my income. It's like we're talking about a water level or something when we talk about money. We're talking about something that's finite. We're talking about something that you really have to put a lot of effort. And if your idea of money and hard work, if those are mapped together the same way that people say time is money, which is actually a really, really negative metaphor. I mean, think about that. If you tell your brain time is money, what do you think is going to happen when you start making a lot more money? Your brain's going to say, well, we got to start putting more time in, like, to do this. And you're going to start feeling guilty about making more money per hour because someone pays you $2,500 for 4 hours of work, and you're used to doing 20 hours of work to get that. The fact that you have time and money tied together like that, your brain's saying, well, we got paid $2,500, and you're going to create a lot of extra work for that client or whatever it is you're trying to fulfill, so you can feel okay, so you don't feel guilty that you're taking money away from that person. Those ideas of time and money and hard work are so mapped together that we do not allow ourselves to take too much out of here from somebody else, or we get fearful when we start to see the money reaching the bottom of the bank account. It creates all kinds of self-limiting problems to think about money as this thing that fits into a container. Now, we can take every single concept in your life. I'm only going to talk about money today. Attention, admiration, love, whatever it is you're looking for. When you talk about that thing, I'm fighting with my spouse, whatever it is. Well, what type of people fight? People in a competition fight. Or I have a conflict. We talk about, in the West, when we talk about relationships, the war metaphor really dominates our relationships. Now, most people, if you ask them, they would say, well, I don't think relationships are war. I don't think love is war. But what will really tell you what their deeper cognitive metaphor is, how they talk when they talk about their relationship. A conflict, right? Well, fighting. That's what people at war do. So the deeper concept of the thing that you're pursuing, whether it's money, whether it's recognition, whether it's fame, whatever it is, it's linked to some irrational understanding about what that thing really is. Money is not a thing that fits into this, but that's how we think about it. Time is not really money, but that's how we think about it. And those two neural structures in our mind are mapped together, so to where one fires, the other fires. Think about time, think about money. They're like, and they can only move in conjunction with one another. That's why Your income reaches a certain level, you're working 40 hours a week and it's like I'm maxed out. I can't invest any more time in it. Well, those two things are so linked together. Your brain won't allow you to behave differently because those two ideas are so they're like Siamese twins, right? One goes one place, the other one has to go. Your income goes up, your time has to go up. If your income has to hit a certain level and stop because you don't have enough time to earn more money than that. There's all kinds of weird subconscious things that happen. And so let's talk about busy work for a second, because I talked about earlier how like a lot of time fear of failure causes people to have 20 different projects going at the same time, right? Well, that's limiting your income. You're not making as much money because you're never launching anything. What you don't know that's actually happening is because your mind has time and money mapped together, it says, okay, in order for me to make a certain amount of money, I got to put a lot of time into it, right? And you're thinking, well, your mind's thinking, well, I got to make $10 million, whatever, $1 million, whatever my goal is. So because time and money are so linked together, and time and money and hard work, it has to justify that by creating a lot of extra work that is not necessary to get there. And that's what keeps a lot of people stuck. So we've gone like 5 layers deep on this. But the bottom line is, I'm going to reveal one more thing to you and then tell you something you can start doing today. We've gone from fear to not being the real problem to these four emotions. One of these four emotions being the real problem. We've talked about how these emotions are artificial, right? They're constructed by stories, by deeper things within us called cognitive metaphor. Cognitive metaphor is where our language comes from, right? Our language can't change the cognitive metaphor any more than you can change like the content of a river by pulling buckets out, buckets of poison water out and putting buckets of clean water in. If you don't change a thing upstream, it's not going to matter, right? The thing upstream that needs to change is the actual metaphor that is giving rise to the language, the deeper metaphor underground that's causing the weed or the plant to grow. You change that, the language will change by itself. And then you don't have to wrestle with positive affirmations and telling yourself, I can do this, I can do this. And your mind's feeling like it's fighting you, right? You ever notice that when you say positive affirmations, there's a voice in the back of your head saying, hey, traitor, imposter, this is not real, you're being phony. That voice is actually that deeper concept fighting the new concept you're trying to put in. Change the concept, the war stops. And then all of a sudden, your language starts to change automatically because of the way you're thinking about it. Now, this does take some training, but you can make this type of change very, very, very quickly once you uncover what's really happening. There's a great book on this called Find Your Power Identity, written by myself. There's another book out there called Metaphors We Live By, which will blow your mind about how it's not really our language that drives our thinking. It's the metaphorical representations of the things that we're talking about. The way you think about money, the thing that you use to represent money is going to change. It's going to direct the language you use when you talk about it, your actions, your attitude, everything. So you got to change that. Now, let's talk about what you can do about this. So you're probably thinking, well, Seth, that makes a lot of sense how that understanding of money as this physical thing that fits into a container, I can see how that would limit me and actually tie my work to my income, where I feel like, well, the only way to increase my income is increase my work. And maybe you've read a lot of books on this and well, I know that's not how it works. There's people out there who say that you can increase your income without increasing your work. That's true. But if the deeper belief inside you has linked the ideas of time and money together in such way, it will not allow you to take that person's advice, to do what's in that book, to become that person. It won't allow you. You can't act in conflict with your deeper identity and your beliefs about how things really are. Your mind will always find a way to stop you. And it'll usually show up in ways that you think are completely out of your control. Like maybe you have this big opportunity to close this sale right in front of you. And all of a sudden, like you have a health crisis right in the middle of it. And you think, well, I had no control over that. Your body did. Your body's very smart. I have seen people who like all kinds, they're just on the verge of a big breakthrough. And all of a sudden, a bunch of things start happening in their life that distract them from it. And they're like, I have no control over this. And I say, you know what? Pretend you do anyway, accept that you control it. And then we started talking about changing their metaphor. And all of a sudden, it's like their luck changed. Everything in their environment changed. I don't know exactly how this works. I have theories about it, but your subconscious mind is tied to all the energy in the universe, right? The holographic universe theory proves this to be true. I'm not going to get too much into that woo-woo new age stuff because I believe you do have to actually put some effort and value forward to actually make a change in your life to bring prosperity. But here's what you can do if you're thinking, okay, I see this. I'm afraid of asking for money. I've hit this income barrier. I can't seem to get past this income level. I thought it was fear of success, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of asking for money. Now I understand that it's probably one of these four emotions driving it. Now the next question is what deeper concept is actually causing is generating that guilt, is generating that shame, generating that resentment, that grief, and is causing fear to show up when fear is unnecessary. Let's just talk about money for today. What is money actually? It's a representation of energy. And I'm not talking about weird woo woo type of stuff. I mean, like, I put energy into building something, I put energy into providing a service. Somebody else comes along, they give me this money. It's not really the money that they're giving me. That money only has value because they did something. They invested their time or their energy, or they organized energy in such a way to where it created something of value, and they give it to me. It actually is an energy exchange. Now you're probably thinking, well, Seth, this is just philosophical. It has nothing to do with that. Well, think about energy compared to this. We think about money as this thing which fits into a container. We have more, we have less of it. We can have too much of it. It can spill over. If we take some out of another person's bucket, they're going to have less in their bucket. We can think about it that way, or we can think, okay, if I think of what money really is, it's a representation. The dollars don't mean anything. The bills mean nothing. The credit card means nothing, right? It points to the fact that at some level there was something created of value by investing energy into it. Now, here's where this becomes useful. Increasing your income, multiplying your income doesn't come from putting more energy into something, right? It doesn't come from putting more energy into something. It has to do with the quality of the energy that you bring to the table, the quality of the energy. Now, I understand we live in a world where some artificial structures have been set up where people can take from other people and like get them to do a bunch of work and invest a lot of energy, and someone else profits all of them. I understand there's a lot of unjust systems out there, but this is how things actually work. This the reason those systems had to be built in the first place is to try to get around this universal law of energy exchange, but it's the quality of the energy. So if you work for 1 hour, you can do something like data entry. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if you do data entry, but it's a very low quality. Like, there's a very low payoff for actually doing that. It's necessary, but there's a low quality of energy being invested into that hour, and so that's why people who do that don't get paid a lot of money. Flipping burgers, taking orders. Like, it takes the. I had to do that for a long period of my life. There's nothing wrong with having to do that at some point in your life. But what people will typically do is go, well, I want to make more money. So what I got to do? I gotta get more education, more credentials, more work, more, because this idea of money as this thing that moves like this, it's locked in. When we start thinking it in terms of energy, and it's the quality of the energy we bring to the hour, we think, you know what? All I've got to do is that whatever energy I put into that hour has to be a higher quality energy, right? In other words, it's a change of multiplication. It's a change of the type of energy you put into. It's not about more or less. The ideas of more or less is attached to this understanding of money as this thing that fits into a container. Money is expandable and contractible based on how much energy you actually, not how much energy. See, it got me too. The quality of energy you put in. This is why I've found that for a lot of people, breaking the $100,000 a year mark is actually harder than breaking the seven-figure a year mark. Right? I don't get into that too much, but it's easier to get from a few 100,000 to a million than it is to get from like 60,000 to 100,000. Not in all cases, but a lot of the time that it is, because there's a qualitative change that happens. And when a qualitative change happens in terms of the energy you're putting into something, that expansion starts to work, right? A lot of the time, the reason people are stuck at 60,000 because they're trying to pile on, doing more work, more activities, more things, more staff, selling more product, more, instead of thinking, what is the highest quality energy I can bring to this hour? People who make $10,000 just to get up and speak on stage for 30 minutes, the quality of the energy and the experience that they're creating is actually what's getting them paid that. It's not about hard work, but our idea of money, our concept of money is so tied to the idea of hard work that, like, even if we're consciously saying, I know I don't have to work hard to have money, I can make money easily doing something I love, that deeper belief that's tying time, money, hard work together and thinking of money as something that fits in a container, it will fight for its right to survive, and it'll cause all kinds of weird self-sabotaging behaviors. You'll feel guilty about taking things from people because you're taking too much from them. It can cause shame. It can cause all these things, right? Because of the deeper story, the belief about money. Everything in life is like this. Our relationships, starting a business, everything. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a hold of my book, Finding Your Power Identity, that unpacks this idea in detail and talks about how these four emotions show up. You can take this book, You can put it into AI, and then you can just ask AI to ask you a couple questions. Ask it two things. Ask it, number one, to describe your current financial status, and then number two, to describe your ideal financial life, right? Describe both of those things. Do the interview, like where it actually talks to you and it asks you those two questions, and put my book in there first, or take the transcript of this recording if you don't want to buy the book, and ask AI to detect the deeper metaphor that's driving your language. Tell it you're talking about cognitive metaphor, and ask it to detect a deeper metaphor, and it's gonna tell you something and reveal something to you that's going to be astonishing. You can do the same thing with your relationships. Talk about how your relationship is now. Talk about how you want it to be. Right? It's not the goals that you're discussing and your current financial status that are revealing. It's the language you use to describe these ideas that is going to reveal the deeper concept at work. If you think of time and money and hard work all being tied together, and instead of thinking it as an energy, that more comes to you when the quality, not the quantity, of the energy changes. That's how you multiply your income, because your creative mind, your creative blocks stop. It goes, okay, well, the ideas of hard work and money, they're no longer tied together. I've got this new concept. Now, there's a way to embed this. I actually have a somatic type of session that I do where I help to actually embed these ideas into people's subconscious mind, and it involves a lot of stuff, right? Like breath work, meditation, visualization, fasting, a lot of stuff. It's hard work to do it for the 90 minutes, but once the 90 minutes is done, you can install the new belief, and the old one's going to be there, but you can easily keep training against it. And that's how the guy I told you about, who was an addict for 10 years, we broke him of that addiction. I found the deeper metaphor and identity at work that was actually causing all this negativity, this negative thoughts, this need for this thing, and everything changed. So you can go to AI, you can put either my book or a transcript of this in, say, read and study this book, or read and study the transcript of this video, get this concept, and then I'm going to talk to you, and I want you to detect the deeper metaphors that I have about love, about relationships, about the thing I'm trying to achieve. And I guarantee it is going to reveal things to you that are going to scare you at first, but then they're going to give you hope, because you're going to realize what really needs to change. It is not our thoughts. You don't change your life by changing your thinking. It's this deeper thing within you that's called your value intelligence. I won't have time to get into that today, but let's just end with this. You have three levels of intelligence. You have IQ, which is your monkey chatter, your pattern recognition capability. You've probably known a lot of people who have high IQs who are doing very well in life, a lot of people who have high IQs who are on the streets, right? IQ is a very poor predictor of success. It helps to have it. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad I have a high IQ, but it's not what's gotten me where I am today. It held me back for a long time, because it's only that surface level, that monkey chatter intelligence. And what we typically do is we apply this thinking of IQ as an indicator of success, and we start looking for systems, for patterns, for the right business, for the right marketing formula. We're looking for all these. Our capacity for pattern recognition is looking for this perfect system. And that's what happens when a person launches one business, starts to launch one business, doesn't finish it. The IQ is at work, and it's looking for all these things, and it's thinking, why can't I get there? Why can't I figure out how to create this business, or overcome this fear, or whatever it is, because only your IQ is working on it. At the deeper level, the other two intelligences are always at work. They're always at work, always. So picture it this way, like iceberg tip, IQ right here. The middle of the iceberg is your EQ, your emotional intelligence, your capacity for self regulation, your capacity to very quickly get yourself back into a normal state after feeling angry, after feeling depressed, after feeling like heartbroken after a breakup. A person who is not well regulated, their emotions are going to kind of be like this, and they may get snagged up here and snagged down here. But if a person has good emotional intelligence, they're still going to have ups and downs, but they're going to be pretty steady. They have strong emotional intelligence. Most self help people, when they talk about getting to the quote root of the problem, they only go as deep as emotional intelligence. And that's good. It creates a little bit of change. At least you're not trying to rationalize your way out of it or think your way out of it. You're going to the deeper level of the iceberg. IQ, EQ, right? A person who has high IQ but cannot self regulate, has very low EQ, they're going to have a hard time in life. But there's one deeper level of intelligence that I talk about in my book, Awaken Your Shadow, in my book, Finding Your Power Identity, in a lot of my work, and it's called your VQ. VQ is value intelligence. It's the deeper structures that you rely on to make decisions about where to invest your time, where to invest your money, who to date, when to quit, when to persevere. It's your value intelligence at work. Now, I didn't just make this up. Formal axiology, which is the measurement of value intelligence, is a real science. Most people don't know this. It's got its own scientific journal. It's been around for decades. It was actually invented by, or discovered rather, by a guy named Robert Hartman back in the early 50s. You probably never heard of him. He's not popular in the self-help world, right? A lot of people don't know who he is. There's a few people out there who do. Even a lot of the people who do understand value intelligence, really, they kind of only understand it at an intellectual level. They don't understand it at the depth that I'm talking about today. That is everything, all the decisions that you make as far as how to regulate your emotions, your EQ, how to direct your pattern recognition, your IQ, is all rooted in your VQ, your value intelligence. Right? All your decisions, we invest our time, money, and energy into things based on how we value them. If we value money as being this thing that fits into a container and that you have either more of it or less of it, and you got to pour a lot of hard work in to get a lot more money, if that's a broader concept in your VQ about money, your money and your time are always going to be tied together, and you're going to reach a saturation point where you can't work any more hours, and so your income can't go up. The deeper value intelligence associated with the energy metaphor that we talked about, where we think, okay, it's not putting more energy into something, it's changing the quality of the energy. That'll change everything if you think about money that way. And you can go to any person who's really, really done very well with money, makes it very easily. And even if they can't break it down in the detail that I'm talking about, they would hear this and go, oh, yeah, I've always known that. Doesn't everybody know that? They've been immersed in that water their whole life. They don't even like recognize that it's different than anybody else's. And you have been so immersed in the deeper idea that you have about money, about your worth, about relationships. And a lot of it came from your environment, but most of it was installed into your brain when you started learning language. What is the model that you learned for love? Well, you learned it really early. That experience you have where you felt unloved and you think, well, maybe that's the root of my fear of intimacy. And then the counselor or the life coach or the Reiki master takes you back to that point in your timeline and thinks it's healed the cause. No, that experience was because of something that was installed into you very early when you started to learn language. Because when we learn language, we've got to learn concepts, right? Love is more than just a word, right? There's an entire conceptual understanding of what it means to love a person. And some people have a very distorted idea of love, and some people have a very healthy idea of love. And the results in their life are going to reflect that. So it's called value intelligence, cognitive metaphor. Is happening at a very deep level. It's directing your EQ, directing your IQ. The reason a lot of these programs out there, these 8-week coaching programs that heal this emotional trauma, or these business programs that give you this success blueprint or whatever it is, that's only IQ. That's only EQ. This is deeper. It's tied to your identity. And more importantly, this is the last thing I'm going to say, it determines how you answer the most important question in your life. And that is, what are you worth to you? What is your value in your own eyes? That's the deepest thing. It's called an intrinsic evaluation in formal axiology. What are you worth to you? Ask somebody that, and they're going to start thinking about their net worth, or they start thinking about like all the accumulation of all the decisions they make, or the relationships that they have. That means that their measuring stick in terms of their value is attached to either an income or a status or amount of good decisions versus bad decisions. And again, it's this metaphorical representation that our value is tied to some finite thing in space. Right? Finite things, you can have more of them, you can have less of them. And that's why a lot of people spend their lives trying to work more, trying to make more, trying to love more, trying to people please more, to try to kind of like bring up the answer to that question, bring up their sense of self-worth. But once you detach those two things and understand that who you truly are is you are infinite. You're infinite. There's never going to be another person like you. You're of infinite value. You're absolutely irreplaceable. And this is more than just a pep talk. Like this is a metaphorical representation of your value. Right? Your value is not something you can measure on a pie chart or a line chart where it's either this low or this high, or this is the top, or I'm feeling good today. I'm feeling like I'm worth shit. I'm feeling $1,000,000. Right? That's another bad one. I feel like $1,000,000. You're tying your identity to a financial level, like an income level. I stumbled on that a little bit. And so what's going to happen when you don't have a lot of money? Is it going to be a surprise that you feel like shit? Because that metaphor of you feeling like $1,000,000, like you've heard that so many times, your identity, your sense of self-worth, your feeling of how good you are actually doing in your life, how happy you are, is tied to this idea of money. An idea of money is tied to this idea of this finite thing that you can have more of or less of, and it takes a lot of hard work. You're starting to see the problem here, and all this is going to cause guilt, shame because we don't have enough, guilt because we're taking from somebody else and they don't have enough, resentment because somebody else has more, and there's this comparativeness and this competitive nature, or grief, like if I let go of it, it's gone forever. Like that's not how it works, right? Money is available at not an infinite supply, but you can expand and multiply the amount of money you make, not by doing more, not by being more, not by being more confident, not by healing trauma, not by any of that stuff, but by changing the metaphorical representation of money at your VQ level. That's it. Now, I went a little bit longer than I expected to today, but that is really what is going on when people say they're afraid of success, they're afraid of failure. It's not fear. Fear is not the problem. It's guilt, shame, resentment, or grief that calls fear to show up when fear is unnecessary. But those aren't even the problem, because those are artificially constructed by stories, I don't even know what to call them, concepts, programs that get into us very early when we start learning language. And those programs are called, by linguists and neuroscientists, cognitive metaphors. You think of a word as one thing that you say that lights up a couple neurons. But when you say the word love, there's a whole group of neurons that fires up along with that are associated with everything that you consider love to be and love not to be, right? Right? It's entire world of experience happening inside your nervous system, and your conscious mind can't process it fast enough. It's not going to think, all right, I met this person I'm really starting to fall in love with, and things are going to be great from here. But at the subconscious level, what are the stories that you've told yourself about love? The broader concept of love, all that information, all those synapses that are firing, all those little neurological networks, those things in your nervous system that are reacting to that, you can't consciously process all those things at once, but it'll show up in the relationship as you self-sabotaging, you being late for the next date, or your car breaking down, or something that seems to be out of your control. Or maybe you actually just sabotage the relationship by working too much, by not responding to the person, or by being mean when you don't want to be mean, or by snapping at them. There's all kinds of weird self-sabotaging ways that we push the things we really want out of our life. And we think, why did I do that? It's because there's these deeper programs running that we think, oh, I love this person, but we don't know that that word love sets up all kinds of fears, insecurities, memories, stories about how love should and should not be. And those are the problem. And you can't change it by saying, I am worthy of love and my soulmate is out there. That's just the language, IQ level. You do some meditation, you kind of get to where you like it gets into your EQ. You do maybe some breath work, some meditation. It's still only at the emotional level. The deepest level is cognitive metaphor, VQ, identity. And when you understand that you are a being of infinite worth, I believe I'm an extension of the same universal, infinite living mind from which everything arose. And here's the thing about that. You might think, well, that sounds like a nice belief, but here's what that belief does to your sense of self-worth. What is infinite cannot be measured. Cannot be measured. There's not a ruler long enough to measure infinity. And so once you understand yourself really at a deep level, I mean, I'm not just saying say the positive affirmation every day in the mirror, because your old conditioning is going to fight that. I'm saying you really get it embedded here into your value structure, and you believe, you know, you have this conviction of yourself as an infinite being. The whole idea of measurement, having to make more income, having to please this person, do this, do that, do more, it all disappears because measurement completely exits the picture. Completely. Because you cannot measure what's infinite. And that's really the nub of it. Once you understand that, fear, guilt, shame, resentment, all those things, all those artificial emotions, the stories dissolve that get connected with them. And then all of a sudden, fear doesn't show up anymore. But fear's still there. You still feel afraid when maybe you're about to like jump in front of traffic and you see a car coming towards you. That's perfectly normal. Fear is fine. But it stops showing up in times when it's not really needed. And then you go forth with confidence. You don't need more confidence than you already have. You need to take your foot off the brake. You can't increase your confidence. I mean, think about that. Increase or decrease confidence. That's a metaphorical representation of confidence as this thing that like this finite thing that goes up or goes down. Is it any wonder why your confidence isn't as high as it needs to be? It's tied to the spatial representation of this thing, which is not limited to space. Like it's an infinitely expandable idea. But we tie these things. We tie our sense of like love, prosperity, success, whatever, to the physical world in such a way that we always feel like there's a measuring stick that's telling us you did enough, you didn't do enough. That's what keeps people stuck. Now, that went longer than I expected it to be. You're probably thinking, okay, is there anything I can do about this? Is there any way that I can work with you? I don't have any one on one slots available right now. I probably will at some point in the future. If you're interested in talking to me, if you're in sales or you're an entrepreneur or you're somebody who really feels like you have become the bottleneck in your business in your life, I can help you. I'm actually, most of what I do is helping people change their marketing messaging. But because I understand human behavior and language at this level, I've done a lot of personal growth work with people too. And because, when you're working with a business owner and you're trying to help them increase their business and make more money, all these self-sabotaging behaviors start coming up. And then you as a coach have to deal with them. That's how I stumbled into this stuff almost 30 years ago. That's why I've learned all this. Real world one-on-one experiences where I'm accountable to make sure the person in front of me gets results. I'm not like writing some book or speaking from stage where I'm not accountable to the person the next week to find out what really happened. I learned this from being in the trenches, and this will change your life. So, probably thinking, what can you do next? First of all, you can contact me. Follow me on social media. I'm not expecting you to make a decision right away about like actually getting in touch and getting on a call and talking about working together. If you want to just get into my orbit, wherever you're finding this video, follow me here. Send me a message. Just tell me what you got out of this and maybe like what kind of aha moments it sparked. And if you mention this video, I'm going to send you a copy of my book, Finding Your Power Identity. I'm not even going to charge you for it. I'm just going to send you the book. It's called Finding Your Power Identity, and it's going to help you really get a grasp. What is it that's causing this fear to show up when fear is unnecessary? And once you identify what it is, you go through the whole book, contact me. Let's get on a call and let's figure out what we're going to do to actually change this. And it ain't going to take 8 weeks or 16 weeks or a $10,000 seminar. We can change it in a few sessions. And then I'll give you a maintenance program for afterward. I've worked with salespeople, entrepreneurs. I worked with athletes. Well, I won't tell you who he is, but I worked with a guy who was like a 5-time world champion in karate. And I can't remember, it was like 20 something years ago. I don't work with athletes anymore, but I'd be happy to talk to you if you are one. I've helped a lot of people overcome this. And it ain't because I'm anybody special or I'm anybody like more intelligent than somebody else. I just happen to have done this for a very, very, very long time. And I'm very good at seeing through BS. So get in contact with me. Follow me on social media if you want to get more videos like this. I also mainly talk about marketing strategy. So if you want better messaging, language that influences people to actually come to you and buy without price resistance, that's mainly what I help people with. So get in contact with me if you're ready to take the next step. If not, just follow me on social media. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to go get a drink of water now because I'm